Welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, a conversation through the careers of writer Simon Furman and artist Andrew Wildman. Recollections and revelations about the highs and the lows as creatives in comics, books, games, film and TV.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 46 of The Rest is Giant Robots. I'm Simon Furman.
And I'm Andrew Wildman.
And we're back to take you a bit more behind the scenes, I think, this podcast, rather than keep marching on with sort of our respective workloads back in the day. So this all stems out of, I was recently at TF UK Con and doing a panel with Jeff Senior, and there were some nice questions from the people doing the panel and the audience, just more about the kind of behind the scenes, what it takes to craft a comic page and where we started and where we are now, and how an artist and writer can work together more now. You know, back in the day it was probably a little more separation between writer and artist. But these days, obviously, with technology, you can work much more hand in hand. And just how, working with someone like Jeff, the experience is now shorthanded because I know Jeff, he knows me. And, we kind of trust each other a lot more, and so it can be a bit more relaxed with the process.
Yeah, you get kind of used to each other's processes, and also just the way that they create. So, like if you're writing something for Jeff or me or anybody, you kind of already have a sense of what it's going to look like, so you can kind of write to that. It's like script writers writing for particular actors, I guess. Or particular directors, a similar kind of thing, and vice versa as well.
And as I was saying on the panel, we very rarely, back in the Marvel UK days, or even on Scream, had the luxury of knowing who was going to be drawing a given script when you were writing it. A lot of the panel was centered around Target 2006, the Transformers story that both Jeff and I worked on, and Pete is now hitting its 40th anniversary year, which is kind of crazy. but the question from the sort of audience, or the sort of panel leader, was, were you looking at a script and going, that's this one we need Jeff for, with his sort of style of art. And it was interesting because often that wasn't the case. We couldn't do it. I was just writing scripts, and then at the time Ian Rimmer would allocate them to an artist who was available. We were on a weekly schedule, so often getting an artist to do 2 consecutive issues was tough. So it was very much who was available. But very occasionally, I would go to Ian, I think this is a Jeff one. And that's largely because Jeff's style was so kind of kinetic and visceral. And, so if it was going to be this great, the whole issue, I think part 6 or something of Target 2006 is a whole running battle between Galvatron and Ultra Magnus. That just goes from page 1 to page 11. And I kind of couldn't see who else could do it justice except for Jeff. Because, the opening splash page, which has become kind of iconic, is Ultra Magnus in his sort of truck mode, driving towards us, and Galvatron's clinging to the roof, kind of, for grim death, but, sort of gouging fingers in. And I thought, this is a Jeff splash page. It really is.
Yeah.
And so, occasionally I would say to Ian, can we get Jeff to do this one? And, sometimes the dice just fell luckily, but other times we did kind of say, this is a Jeff issue. but very rarely did we get that luxury
Yeah.
of being able to know who the artist was.
Yeah. And certainly, like you say, having one artist do, consecutive issues, because for all sorts of reasons. And I guess you felt as the editorial people, yourself included, felt that you had to, partly because of deadlines, you had to keep different people doing different things so that they can all be working like essentially at the same time, but keep that production line moving, because it's a weekly comic. I mean, it's a crazy schedule. But also, I guess once you've worked with artists and you kind of like their work and you get to know them a little bit, you feel some kind of, maybe you don't, but I would assume you feel some kind of moral obligation to keep a little bit of income for them going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a certain amount. Also, you don't want them going elsewhere. We were always somewhat fighting the drift to 2000 AD, because a lot of our artists, great, they loved the work and loved having work, but I think Barry Kitson and Will Simpson always were being drawn more to 2000 AD than Transformers, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
I think they wanted to draw human beings and Judge Dredd and all good.
Yeah.
But we wanted, to keep our stable of artists, which was always changing, sort of busy. So, it was good to have a multi-part story that you could have Jeff Anderson, Will Simpson, Jeff Senior, Ron Smith for one episode, and have all those people, kept busy. But Jeff was saying, again, on his side of things, he would just get a script. He might get reference and indications of where we were in the larger story, but often it was just, no, these are the 11 pages I'm drawing. I don't really have a frame of reference of the whole story. So the scripts themselves had to be kind of supportive of that the artists were coming in almost blind to the story.
Yes. I mean, there must be continuity issues there. I mean, did they get like photocopies? Did you have photocopies in the old days?
We did, yes. And I'm sure they did. I'm sure Ian and I were forever kind of photocopying what we had, but because of the pace of the thing, Jeff Anderson might have been working on issue 80, say, and Jeff Senior on issue 83, but we hadn't got any of Jeff Anderson's art through yet.
Yeah.
So it was hand to mouth stuff, and we were for always just going, well, okay, at this point, these are the settings, or somewhere in my brain I was making them as distinct as possible, the chapters. But sometimes, like there's a bit in Target 2006 where Jazz has been captured by Galvatron, and that he's sort of tied to a kind of restraining apparatus or something to keep him prisoner, and that obviously had to be consistent. So that was where we might say to an artist, can you draw the thing so we can share the design with the next artist along?
Yes, I mean that happens I mean, even with longer form comics, even with 20-page issues, I've had that before, where there'll be something that's been designed and you just get sent the design. So it certainly happens in animation when you're storyboarding, that props will be designed and it's given to the storyboard artist. And you might have two storyboard artists working on the same project at different episodes of the same project. So that makes sense.
I mean, the other thing, people ask, one of the questions from the audience was, well, Target 2006 has quite a few different kind of layers of story to it, location, storyline. And somebody asked me whether that was deliberate, in terms of, then you've got one artist working on that storyline mostly, and one artist handling, the stuff on Earth, there's stuff on Cybertron. And when I looked at it again, I thought either I was absolutely lucky or I was thinking slightly tactically there, that it was that's the way to approach this. It's technically try and make it compartmentalized within the larger story.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. That's like that's like having different episodes of a TV show going to different locations and potentially having different directors, isn't it? I mean, generally you'd have one director for one episode, but there are some instances of different directors being assigned to different locations if a TV show is global. Because the other thing happens as well. You get one director doing an episode where it's hopping all over the globe, and that director is hopping all over the globe to shoot all the different bits. But that's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, when I look back at it, it was like the issue that Ron Smith drew that introduces the wreckers. Again, somebody in the audience said you could almost take that out of the narrative and you'd still be able to follow the main story, because it's a sort of interlude story. And in a way, it was perfect for Ron, who only did one for us, but it's a great job he did. But it was, it was nice in a way that he did that little, interlude story.
Yeah.
One of the questions from the audience was, if you could, would you have Jeff redraw all the ones he didn't draw from Target 2006? so it's solid Jeff from start to finish. And the answer, of course, is I'd love to see it, but A, practically it couldn't happen, and B, I love the other ones because I loved the UK comic because you could go from Will Simpson to Barry Kitson to Jeff Anderson to Jeff Senior in the same through storyline. And the readers didn't mind. Readers didn't mind the art style chopping and changing like that. In fact, it probably gave us our sort of unique identity.
Yeah, different flavors are good because the characters are also, so recognizable just because of the way they're designed. So you have got continuity there, just rendered slightly differently. But I mean, if it was human characters, it would be a hard one to follow.
Yes, maybe more disjointed.
Yeah, but the beauty of comics anyway is that they're very kind of they're very distinctive, aren't they, because of costume or whatever. And certainly with Transformers, it's very, very distinctive in many ways, even in black and white.
Yeah. And, Target 2006 was sort of the heyday of, I was kind of being experimental with my storytelling, and we'll talk more about the sort of storytelling side of things, but I was being more experimental. I think it was our first one where I felt freed up enough to go, ooh, I like what Chris Claremont does on X-Men, where he does a kind of story in reverse, or a sort of, you start at the end and then you reveal stuff and then you meet that ending at the beginning, ending at the end. So, just sort of structurally, I was starting to experiment with it. So it's kind of good one in as much as there were lots of different layouts. We were allowed back then, until Marvel US kind of came in and said grid system.
Oh, no.
And don't have characters breaking out of panel borders and things, which we used to do. But as I said, you could still follow the story completely logically on the page. We had good artists who knew how to break panel borders without breaking that spell of your eye following the story down the page.
It's odd that Marvel would dictate that, because I mean, back in the day it was kind of known that Marvel was very art-led, which is why they developed plot style so that the artist could kind of lead it with some amazing visuals. And DC was very formulaic in America. That was very grid layout. And then it did flip a bit. DC did get more experimental. I mean, a lot of the early stuff I did for Marvel, I basically based on the way that Dave Gibbons was drawing Green Lantern, with kind of playing around with page layouts. But but it's odd that they should say that.
We had Jim Shooter and then Tom DeFalco, the editor-in-chiefs at their respective time, come over for a visit, and always they were looking at it from that kind of how to draw comics the Marvel way look.
Right.
And that very much was when they looked, because it's funny, Jim Shooter came over around the time Target 2006 was coming out, which is why we were talking about it in the panel. And he looked at it and said, and he didn't really look at it from a story point of view. You could see all he was looking at was, no, these layouts aren't right. You should have the grid system, and it was very much at the time, because it's funny, in the 70s Marvel sort of broke out of it, and you had the likes of Neil Adams and other artists like that breaking all the rules, Jim Steranko and others. But then it seemed to get regulated again, and certainly when we were doing our thing, Marvel was back to a fairly standard grid system thing before again it changed.
I mean, the interesting thing is that, like you say, back in the kind of 60s, 70s, I guess, when you had people like Neil Adams and Jim Steranko doing their thing, they knew what they were doing. Like, they weren't just like chucking it around. They really, really knew what they were doing, and they knew how to make it work. The trouble is that when anything kind of changes like that, or somebody breaks through with something slightly different, then the next wave of people who come along are doing that. There's always going to be a proportion of people who are not quite as aware of the visual flow. They just like the way that it looks.
I mean, there's that sort of thing of imitative rather than innovative, if you get the distinction. So I think, yes, the people who followed those guys just said, well, great, I can do that, and they couldn't do it as well. I always remember a Neil Adams spread from one of the original X-Men comics, and I think it's Sauron, the big one that looks like a pterodactyl, and it's right across a double-page spread, and the arms and wings are spread out, and all the panels, the other next panels, are in the wingspan of Sauron. And I looked at it and thought, oh, this is so good. Love it. But you could follow it. It didn't confuse that story eye problem of reading, left to right, down, across the page.
Yes, I mean, you have to follow those rules, and some people are going to mix it all up, and they that kind of goes,
I used to hate it in comics, even as a kid reading them, when there was an arrow between panels to tell you where to go. I even then I thought, oh, big fail, if you've got to stick an arrow.
Massive fail. Yeah, the artist has delivered. Well, I mean, the thing is, the artist will deliver. Very often, the artist will deliver the work, and if it's got an interesting layout, it doesn't have to be too kind of, it doesn't have to break a lot of rules. It doesn't have to throw it around too much before. So not just the layout of the panels, but the positioning of the characters in the panels. Sometimes is slightly awkward for the flow, especially because then the dialogue for Marvel's being written afterwards. So that's then the skill of the letterer. The letterer can pull the eye round.
Yes.
Where the artist hasn't. But then if neither of those two things do it, then the poor old editor has to say to the paste up artist, just like, can you stick an arrow in it, because it's just not working.
No, I know. And I mean, it really is, even in I've recently been rereading the whole Tomb of Dracula series, Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan, and Gene Colan, what an amazing artist and draftsman. But sometimes there are arrows, and you just think, damn, you were carried away there or something with, the curve of Dracula's cape or something, and really that completely takes the eye in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
But
No,
that
it's a skill that people don't realise.
no, and someone was asking me about at the panel at TFUK Con, how did I start out? How did I learn my kind of art and craft, if you like, of comic script writing?
Yeah.
So I was kind of lucky in that because I was working at IPC, initially in their competitions department and then on Scream, I used to have a lot of time over in the sort of boys comics division of IPC, chatting to the editors, and occasionally I would just say, have you got any old scripts I can look at?
Yeah.
So, they would go to the filing cabinet drawer and hand me John Wagner scripts for Judge Dredd, or Pat Mills scripts for Slain or Nemesis. And so, I just devoured those. And also, it was interesting to see how different writers, some were quite sort of verbose in their scene descriptions.
Yeah.
Sort of Pat Mills would pack it with reference and, check out this, Celtic myth and things like that. And, John Wagner and Alan Grant's sort of Judge Dredd's scripts were basically Dredd on bike, Dredd shoots perp, Dredd, and it was like that. I just thought, wow, what a difference. But then you'd look at the strip and think, no, it just gave the artist more of the excuse me, more of the responsibility to make the decisions on the page, long shot, mid shot. I don't think Wagner really bothered with that. It was just, the art. It's the artist's job, and I think I leaned more to that John Wagner school of thought, which is it's a collaborative thing. You don't want to be too prescriptive in your scripting.
I wonder if in his earlier scripts, he was a bit more descriptive, and then after a while, he was quite confident that I know the artist's going to do this all right, and then he'd, be a bit more brief about it, give him some leeway.
Yeah, maybe so. But yeah, so it was interesting. I got to read all of those, and then obviously I worked on Scream, and apart from sub-editing the scripts that were coming in for Scream, I got to write a few as well. And honestly, I think they weren't good, my initial scripts. I think despite the fact that I'd read all these other scripts, I still tried to put too much in.
Yeah.
I think I was carried away with, oh, this is such a great story. And so I maybe overstuffed them with panels and dialogue. I remember John Ridgway, who drew my first Transformers story. He had a quiet word with Ian and said, there's too much in this. It's going to look cramped.
Yeah.
And I think John sort of pared it back a bit, but he was a very seasoned comics artist.
Yeah. He probably thought, this young Simon chap, there's no future for him.
No. But of course, we all, have to start somewhere. And, that's I guess, the great thing. It's all a learning curve, but you have to, again, one of the things in the panel, I just said, you've got to start with the building blocks. You can't just get right in there and think you can do it. You've got to sort of do the hard graft and hone your talent.
I mean, you were lucky, I guess, being in the office. You were on the inside, so you could study all that stuff firsthand, and then talk to other people around. If you wanted any tips and tricks, that was really a good place to be.
Yeah, and Ian was a great editor, who again just sort of understood what worked on the page and what didn't, and so obviously he had to read my scripts, and he would often come back and say, "You're cluttering it up," or I think we can get rid of that, or we need more of that. So yeah, you have to learn and refine.
Yeah, very much so. So have you cracked it yet, Simon?
I don't know, probably not. Every time I start, I've just been doing something that we can't talk about yet, but I can kind of say is for Battersea Power Station. And that, again, every time I start with a script, I think, oh, is this good enough? Am I, or in fact, the thing now I feel is, am I just doing this, as a sort of move this place into that? And, am I just sort of kind of too set in my ways now? Is there a better way to do it than I'm doing it?
Yeah, but I think, and that is the way it goes, isn't it? When you stop sort of questioning that, when you stop thinking, yeah, this, maybe I could do it differently, or it's kind of, I think for most creatives, there's always a bit of imposter syndrome. It's almost like you feel like you haven't quite got there yet, because especially if there's still people in the industry working who were, a creative generation before you. So like some of those people that, you'd mentioned. I mean, we're getting along in the tooth now, so there's not many of the guys who were doing that work ahead of us around necessarily. But when there are, you always feel like you've got more to learn or further to go, I think. And that you haven't quite mastered your craft yet. But that's healthy, because you probably never will, because there's nowhere to get. You just do what you do and gradually hone it, and sometimes you change, and sometimes you shift sideways into different ways of storytelling, but it's just continual change and growth. So yeah, we never really get there.
No, absolutely not. And it's funny, the more you work in other media, so for games or TV or film, you have to sort of keep reminding yourself that you're not writing those things with comics. Because I kind of describe comics writing and art as the art of leaving out. In other words, it's not a through narrative in the sense that you're going to see almost every action in a scene. In fact, you've got to shortcut it, otherwise the stories would be a tiny snippet of a story. You've got to be able to jump, even in, say, an action scene. You might sort of show one thing and the result of that, but then you move it along to the next thing. So it's very much, it's not manga where almost everything, every little flex of a hand or fist will be in its own panel or something. And I guess that's the thing, comics writing, art, it really is what you don't show as much as what you show.
Yeah, I mean, manga do have that very decompressed thing, don't they? Where they decompress time. So you do have a lot of that. Whereas, like you say, Western comics tend to compress things a bit, cause and effect, move on.
Yeah, and also just different narrative techniques for telling the story. Obviously, you've got dialogue. You've got, in the old days you had thought bubbles, and these days you tend to have narrative captions that sort of can pull you out of a hole sometimes, in terms of, we don't have to see the whole origin of Spider-Man. We can bubble it or condense it into a sort of narrative structure within what else is going on at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a character like Spider-Man, there is the assumption that everybody knows where he came from.
So, one of the other things Jim Shooter really drilled into me, sort of one of those rules that I've stuck with to a great extent, is, every issue might be somebody's first. So even if it's, say, issue 247 of Amazing Spider-Man, somebody might be just grabbing that off the rack, and it's make it as entry friendly as possible, so maybe find a way to do a brief recap of, with great power comes great responsibility. If it's a continuing story, have a few flashbacks to bring people up to date. And I think I still work like that. I still, when I approach something, I've recently finished on Return to and Escape from Skull Island. And the very first issue of that is effectively a continuation of a one-season Netflix show. And it was like, oh, So people won't necessarily have seen that. So I can't just launch in here. I've got to make the first issue very catchy uppy without feeling that.
Yeah, and without taking too much time to do it.
Yeah,
Yes.
propel the story forwards, but make sure you're sort of bringing everybody up to date as quickly as possible.
They kind of do that in TV, don't they? Even though you're watching a kind of a series, so you're kind of watching every episode, but they always have a previously, just a little recap, don't they, at the beginning of an episode of a TV series? It's kind of the same idea, just to remind people, new readers certainly, but even people who had the previous episode or previous issue, just where you are in the story.
I mean, I never used to mind when comics had a story so far page. There was definitely a time with Marvel when they were doing that your first page would be a kind of the story so far. And especially when you're writing, as much as people say they don't, writing for the trade. In other words, you're part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so you're thinking, no, it's one big story. I think that was when Marvel started putting little kind of story recaps at the beginning of the issues, because I think it's important. Single issues are a somewhat endangered species, and it's kind of important that they have that every issue, the way I feel it, has sort of its own internal integrity. So it may be part 3 of 5, but something enough happens within that issue for the reader to feel they've been on a little mini journey within a bigger journey.
Yeah, there's got to be a beginning, middle, and end, hasn't there? Even if it's just a chapter within a bigger story. Yeah, definitely. Otherwise, it doesn't hang together at all.
No.
Because if, like you said, if that's the first time somebody's picked up that book, they're going to read it and think, well, A, this doesn't make sense, and B, it's badly written,
or just kind of, I don't feel I've had value for money. And sometimes I've found that with modern comics that they're readable in about 5 minutes flat.
Right.
Maybe not even that. You can just flick through them and go, oh, damn, is that all? And so I always feel like, again, this sort of overpacking thing sometimes. I really want to give the reader their money's worth per comic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and if there aren't enough words in it, it's got to be paced by the illustrations. And that's a skill that a lot of people don't have, to slow the reader down purely from what they're looking at.
And maybe next time we can talk more about the art side of it, because we've lent kind of heavily towards the writing side, but obviously interpreting a script, however it's written, is a whole other skill. And just composing a page and judging what the kind of key shot is and things like that is a whole other skill.
I better do my homework.
And also just one of the questions again from TFUKCon was how much do you trust the artist? And it's like, well, increasingly now we work together, like we're going to be working together again soon. I've been working with Jeff on To the Death. Once you know that artist and you trust them, the answer is you can put less in. You need to put less. You can, they're going to interpret it, and they can kind of read your mind for the bits that aren't in there.
Yeah, very definitely. Good. Okay. Well, next time then you can hand the script to me, and then I'll talk about about the art, and we're back into over that one.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to hear about your sort of very earliest sort of art jobs and how it was, with your very first script, because you had done some sequential stuff of your own, hadn't you? The Apocalypse trilogy, I believe it was called.
Don't remind me of that, Simon.
No,
you mean
still
the greatest sci-fi epic that was never produced?
That's right. No, I still have one of those somewhere. You gave me one back in the day, and I still have it.
It's dreadful.
I'll have to see if I can dig it out.
I don't think there was any sequential work in it. I think it was just It was just like a treatment kind of, text and some illustrations, just talking about
Okay.
what was going to happen. I think, if I remember rightly. But
I'll see if I can dig it out, just because it'd be a fun thing just to do some scans of that and
would
put
it
them up
though?
on the
What, show people?
Patreon. Yes, definitely.
Good grief! I mean, before we worked together, because obviously, some of my first work was with you, but prior to that, yeah, I'd done Thundercats. But even prior to Marvel UK, I'd done some He-Man and Brave Star for London edition. So, but yeah, we can fast track through that and then get to the good stuff.
Yeah, and maybe talk a bit about what our next project together is going to be.
I think we should. I think we need to start talking about that as much as possible, and maybe
I think
even
we
doing
should.
some of it.
Well, yes, that would be handy, sort of that pesky time thing and hand operations and so forth.
We haven't got much time left, have we? At our age,
No.
we need to really get on with it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Anyway, that's been great, and yeah, we'll pick this up, everybody, next time, and like I say, put the emphasis more on the art side of things.
Yeah, and by the way, everybody, you have been listening to episode 46. We didn't say that at the beginning, but
I think I did.
I don't think you did.
I think I did. When you cut this together, I want an apology put in at the end, Oh, you did say episode 46, Simon.
Okay, well, if you did, I'll just edit this bit off.
No, you leave this in.
And then add an apology, yeah.
Excellent.
Cool. All right, Simon, it was great as always. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to The Rest is Giant Robots. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider subscribing for more and maybe share with like-minded friends. This has been a Wildfur production.